Hello and welcome to the Montana Passenger Rail Summit. My name is Justin Angle and I'll be your host or conductor for our time together today. I'm a professor at the University of Montana College of Business, and it's been great learning more about the benefits of passenger rail in the lead up to this event. I'd like to introduce our fearless leaders: Missoula County Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer, Missoula City Council Member Jordan Hess, and Montana State Rep. Andrea Olson. These folks have some welcoming remarks to get us started.
Thanks, Justin. And on behalf of Missoula County and the many sponsors that we have for this event, some of whom we will mention here in just a moment, I want to welcome you to today's 2020 Montana Virtual Passenger Rail Summit. We, back in the earlier part of this year when we started planning this, had no idea that we would be where we are at today. But one of the silver linings in this virtual environment is that we are, I believe, as of this morning, pushing 500 participants or registrants for this event. Many of us who are involved in today's event and also promoting passenger rail here in the state of Montana truly believe that our existing passenger rail system, and indeed an expanded passenger rail system, ought to be a key component of our transportation portfolio for the 21st century. So welcome. This will be an exciting 3 hours that we have ahead of us here. We've got a lot planned. I hope you find it educational, engaging, and perhaps even a little bit inspirational. So with that, I will turn it over to City Councilman Jordan Hess, if he would like to say a few words.
Thanks a lot, Dave. And just on behalf of the City of Missoula, I want to welcome all of our participants. We have participants from a wide range of geographies, and we are so proud to be able to present this to, as Dave said, nearly 500 people. I'm going to keep it brief for now. You'll hear from me again in the third hour, and I'd like to turn it over to State Representative Andrea Olson.
Thank you, Jordan. Good morning, Montana. I'm so honored to be a part of a project, of a kind of back to the future project of helping bring Montanans to the world and the world to Montana. The Montana legislature reaffirmed its awareness of the economic and social importance of public transportation, particularly to rural development. And so I really want to thank all of the distinguished panelists for your leadership in public transportation throughout the United States, and for coming here to Montana, or coming virtually to Montana, to help work with us to bring back, or I should say, enhance passenger rail in Montana, because we do have some, as you know. And I really want to thank all of you who are participating today from Montana and beyond. It's your interest in riding rail. My dad worked for the rail. Santa Claus came in on the train. And for me personally, but for many people I know who came to Montana on the train to go to college, it's an exciting time to believe that passenger rail will once again be an important part of Southern Montana's transportation system. So thank you all, and I'll talk to you again later. Bye.
Okay, thanks, Representative Olson.
And Justin, just if we have time, just a few shout outs specific to our sponsors for this event. So I would like to draw special attention to our highball sponsors, Jacobs and KLJ Engineering, our Superdome sponsors, which consist of the Montana High-Tech Business Alliance, Quandel Consultants, Black Coffee Roasting Company, which is the coffee of the 2020 Montana Passenger Rail Summit, Montana State University, Western Transportation Institute, Missoula Current, M Accounting out of Helena, Montana, the Associated Students of the University of Montana, All Aboard Washington, Juanita Vero, the City of Bozeman, Mountain Line, the Dawson County Economic Development Council, the Missoula Metropolitan Planning Organization, and if I did not mention them earlier, Morrison Merrily Engineering. thank you to all of our Highball and Superdome sponsors and everyone else who sponsored us even at the sleeper car and the coach level. So thank you all, and thanks to our participants. Let's get this thing rolling.
Awesome. Thanks, Commissioner. So our first panel today will feature a discussion assessing the state of passenger rail in America. But before we turn to our panelists, let's hear from some community leaders across Montana on why they are so bullish about passenger rail. This short film is titled Back on Track and was produced by Tom Aldrich with photographic support from Justin France. Take it away.
Well, it was in 1883 that the Northern Pacific Railroad came through the southern tier of Montana and right through Missoula County. We lost passenger rail service through southern Montana in 1979, and for the past 41 years, we've been trying to get it back. In the year 2020, we are embracing passenger rail as a way to bring this state, this region, and this nation back together again. We're doing something that has never been done before in the state of Montana, and that is knitting the state together from Idaho all the way to North Dakota, with counties initiating an effort to establish a regional rail authority, the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority.
Communities would greatly benefit from additional transportation options, such as passenger rail. This safe, affordable, and reliable option would provide the connectivity throughout the region, as well as alleviate some of the weather and traffic concerns. Restoring passenger rail is long overdue. While the northern tier of the great state of Montana is covered, the central and southern tiers aren't. And so anything we can do to increase that would be great.
The rail came through Livingston and route to Yellowstone Park in 1883. Teddy Roosevelt, there's an iconic photo of him right here on the back of a Pullman car waving, a classic Teddy pose in 1903. And then he headed down to Gardner and dedicated the arch that year. I came out here for a summer job in 1972. My fourth summer, I rode the train. Rail travel is efficient, economical, and enjoyable.
This is something the community misses. This is something tourists miss. This is a historical site. This site you before is historical. A lot of people want to be back here looking at the train. The train was part of the history of this part of Helena, and bringing it back, bringing development back to this part of Helena, the 6th Ward, can be better. It's ideal. You know, I think this is a great idea. I think it will boost our economy. I think it will help alleviate some of the inequality that we have here. We will be able to travel freely during the winter months. And so I thank you guys for what you're trying to do. I really do.
I think intercity travel and regional travel once was by train. the economy evolved, industry evolved, but I think not to try to go back to an age, we can never turn back the clock. It's impossible, but we can learn from innovation and technology and realize that there are ways to do old things better now, and optimizing travel between Billings and Missoula and Kalispell and Bozeman is going to be a critical deliverable for us to progress our economy in the next 20 to 30 years. And the best way to do that interconnectivity, I think, is through rail.
Okay, so our first panel, as we said, will discuss passenger rail in America. And at any time, any of you can submit a question for our panelists using the Q&A feature, and that's located at the bottom of your Zoom window on the toolbar. And I'll do my best to get your questions to our panelists. Okay, time for the panel. We have three amazing voices on this topic. We have John Robert Smith, who's the co-chair and senior policy advisor, Transportation for America, Beth Osborne, who's the director of Transportation for America, and Jim Matthews, president and CEO of the Rail Passengers Association. Jim, let's start with you.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I wish I was in Montana. I've made several trips out there to speak to some of the folks, and I really do enjoy it. I think the film did a really wonderful job of laying out what the benefits of rail travel are. I mean, clearly, a lot of us will get kind of tied up in the emotional or the nostalgic piece of it, and that's a real thing. But at the same time, it is a practical transportation option, particularly for rural America. And one of the things that I hope we're going to be able to do over the next few hours as a group is to get at this idea that we hear all the time. When you start talking about passenger rail service, it always becomes a conversation about, well, how are you going to pay for that? And is it going to make money? No one asks whether our highways make money. No one asks if the National Weather Service makes money. Nobody asks if the Air Force makes money. But when you start talking about passenger rail, everybody wants to know if the train is going to make a profit. And I think if we can start to assess the benefits of rail to the community and start to view this as the investment that it actually is, and to start to see the returns that come to the communities as the taxpayers' return on equity or return on investment, I think we can change the conversation. And I hope that's really what we're able to do today as a group. I had just a couple of very quick slides I hope to show you to illustrate my point. This comes from an Amtrak timetable from not all that long ago, where Amtrak really embraced the idea that rail is the economic engine of the heartland. And everyone who talks about Amtrak as a money loser, long distance routes as being money losing long distance routes, it's like a Homeric epithet, like swift-footed Achilles. That's not really the case. Small towns collect that profit rather than Amtrak, and Amtrak itself acknowledged that. This is an ad from not too long ago. This was in Meridian, Mississippi, and my friend John Robert Smith is on the panel with us. And he, I'm sure, can talk more about that. But this points out that the fact that we have this network operating these trains and depositing people all over the country contributes $7.4 billion to the economy. And you see the waiters there at the restaurant in Meridian at Weidman's, very well-known place. And that is what we need to be thinking about. Why do we want to do passenger rail? It's not about an individual route making a profit for Amtrak. It's about the service that's delivered to the taxpayers for the investment of taxpayer money. Next slide, please. We're having this conversation about Montana, so I wanted to share just a little bit of information about what the builder does for Montana right now. And last year, we looked at the direct effects of the builder, the employment, and so forth. But we also looked at induced effects and indirect effects. And so you see $5.4 million and 25 additional jobs come from just goods and services bought, as well as the Amtrak employees that are there working or that pass through the state. In-state purchases by Amtrak, all those kinds of things. Very direct, very sort of obvious kinds of things. So even if you look at just those obvious measures, the fact that we have an empire builder running through Montana is generating millions of dollars for Montana. Next slide. But then this is the slide that I'd like you to think about as well. You have induced visitors. Just one little piece of this that folks don't necessarily think about when we talk about passenger rail. When people get on and off the train, they shop, they stay places, they stay in an Airbnb or a hotel, they pay for recreation, they hit the trails, they eat in restaurants, they go to bars. So they pay sales taxes in those transactions. And employees of those establishments work there in part because of the traffic generated by the train. All of those things add up as well. So that's another $3.4 million that we can show in Montana, just from that kind of thing. This is from our analysis at Rail Passengers Association. Last slide, please. And one of the reasons we're working so hard on this is because, as you know, Amtrak is planning, as one of its responses to the coronavirus crisis, to cut long distance service from daily to 3 times a week. And we have assessed that right now, the Empire Builder contributes about $595 million to the nation's economy. And all of the 12 trains that are daily today that will become 3 times a week trains together contribute about $4.77 billion a year. If you cut that to 3 times a week, the builder's going to be contributing $204 million. That means that the communities served by the Empire Builder will lose $293 million worth of value in the 9 months that Amtrak expects to be running at 3 times a week instead of daily. That turns out to be closer to $400 million if we wind up having to go more than 9 months. So the reason I point that out is for 2 things. One, it's important to recognize the value that these trains bring and continue to bring and could bring to southern and central Montana if we were to get new service, but also to recognize how important it is to support the service that we have now and how important that is to Montanans. So all of that speaks to the value of trains to the communities and to the taxpayers and to the residents. So let's try real hard not to focus on whether a train makes money and instead think about who the train makes money for. And that's really all I had to say. And I look forward to the conversation.
So Jim, I want to thank you for your leadership at RPA and for the working relationship we've had over the past several years. And I'm so pleased to join all of you this morning. I have fought for passenger rail in this country for more than 30 years now. And the most important thing I have learned is that when you're speaking to the value and the vision of passenger rail, it's the messenger that matters most in that discussion. And for those of you in the big sky passenger rail conversation, whether it's preserving the Empire Builder or restoring service through the southern part of your state, you are those messengers that matter most. In my first term in office, I served 16 years as the mayor of my hometown, Meridian, Mississippi. And during my first term, we built the South's first multimodal transportation center, which you see here on the screen before you. And it was an economic development project as much as a transportation project. But midway through construction of this building, Amtrak decided to cut service to long distance trains all across the country, which means I would lose service to my hometown because they were going to cut the crescent off at Atlanta. But it was the mayors we organized across the country that came to Capitol Hill and turned Senator Trent Lott from Mississippi and Senator Kay Bailey Hutchison from Texas and others into passionate champions for the long distance system. And we were able to save most of the long distance routes and turn them back into daily service. And that's how I first got to know about Whitefish, Montana, and Averill, because I was taking the Empire Builder to visit those mayors in those hometowns. Now, don't be drawn into the false choice that it is either preserving the Empire Builder or restoring new service back along the southern part of your state. Because when I was chairman of the board of Amtrak, and we had a lot less money to work with, as Jim and Beth both know at that time, we rolled out Acela, the high-speed rail service in this country for the first time. We not only sustained the long distance system, we improved it. And those of you who are riding the Empire Builder at that time know that to be true. But we also expanded service in what has been now known as state-supported trains. As a region, though, it's not enough to be passionate advocates. You need to be advocates with power, and that's congressional authority. And I want to speak about the Southern Rail Commission, for whom we provide policy advice. The Southern Rail Commission, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama, not only work to preserve the 3 long distance trains that serve them, but to institute new service, the first of its kind in over 70 years in the South, between New Orleans and Mobile. But to do this, they had to have national impact. And these are the products of the Southern Rail Commission's work on Capitol Hill. The fact that rail is in the FAST Act with highways and transit for the first time in the history of the country is due in large measure to the work of the Southern Rail Commission, working with Senator Roger Wicker from Mississippi and Senator Cory Booker from New Jersey. And within that program, we created 2 funding streams, the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements. That's how you're going to provide the capital needed for sidings and crossings in your new service. And also the Restoration and Enhancement Grant, which provides matching funds for operating support of the first 3 years of your new service. But critically important to you is within the FAST Act, it was created a Gulf Coast working group that compelled the FRA and Amtrak and CSX to come to the table and define what would restoration of service look like, what would be the schedule, how much would it cost, and how do we pay for it? And I think that's a good model for you moving forward with the Big Sky Commission. Now, the reason that the Southern Rail Commission has been so successful is because they made their case based on a return on investment. And for the new service between New Orleans and Mobile, the return on investment is 15 to 1, $15 for every $1 invested by those 3 states. And the reason you have that kind of impact is because the new service connects to 3 existing long distance trains. You see, the long distance trains and the new service not only strengthen each other in ridership and revenue, importantly, they strengthen their voice on Capitol Hill. And that is why the Southern Rail Commission's voice is heard by people in power and people in decision-making authority. Now, I've known Beth Osborne, our next panelist, since I was working Capitol Hill on behalf of Amtrak, and she was a staffer to Senator Tom Carper from Delaware. And Beth has not only remained a close friend over those years, she is now also my colleague at Transportation for America and leads our national work. Beth, give us an idea of what you see moving nationally at this time, and most importantly, what do you see as opportunities at this time?
Absolutely. The strange time we find ourselves in has produced a new opportunity to discuss the things we need with regard to infrastructure. There are 2 big opportunities coming up that are real opportunities for rail. One is in early 2021, I do expect that there's going to be some kind of stimulus package. I think that that's likely no matter who wins the election, because when you start out a term, you want to start out with a bang, and we will be, nearly a year into an economic slump that no matter who is in power is going to want to pull us out of. So a stimulus package is a great opportunity to talk about rail needs, and every other booster for every other kind of infrastructure investment area is going to be talking about their needs. Additionally, as part of our regular process, our existing surface transportation program expires on the 30th of this month. We normally authorize our transit, rail, and highway programs over a 5-year period of time. And so the 5 years ends this month. We are not going to have a bill ready to replace the current program by the expiration date. So I expect Congress will extend it likely for a year to give the new Congress a chance to tackle the issue. And as John Robert pointed out, with the leadership of groups like the Southern Rail Commission and our own work, we've been able to really elevate the need and the great benefits of rail investment across the country. And so in the last reauthorization bill, the last surface transportation bill, we added significant funds for rail programs and for new rail service, which the Southern Rail Commission is taking advantage of to restart the service along the Gulf Coast that was ended after Hurricane Katrina. We definitely need to make sure that those programs are preserved in the new bill, but it's also an opportunity to expand and build on them and maybe seek the same budgetary protections for rail funding that we currently have for transit and highway funding. I'd like to say that while the messages are important, the messengers matter most. The most powerful messages, just like John Roberts said, are those on Capitol Hill. And while I believe coalitions like ours are extremely important, the power of our coalition is being able to get our members and our coalition partners to speak up with the same voice at the right time, but they're the right messengers to go to Capitol Hill. When I was on Capitol Hill working for Tom Carper from Delaware, and he, like his senior senator at the time, Joe Biden, were known for riding the train into DC every year, Senator Carper would come off the train with a list from his interactions with people from his district who caught him on the train. That was always challenging for a staffer. But when a Delawarean stopped him on the street and said, "I have this issue," he took it very, very seriously, and it came straight to me. A message from a coalition like mine did not get the same attention. So while we can certainly be helpful and we can supply information, you are your best messenger, and your representatives want to hear from you. And then the last thing I want to say, also building off of what John Roberts said, is more service strengthens the case for existing service. The time when Amtrak had its least support on Capitol Hill was when it was ending service and decreasing service across the country. And it communicated to members of Congress that it was a dying and irrelevant service. That is the biggest threat to lines like the Empire Builder. It's in fact how transit was destroyed across a lot of the country. What happened was the operator would cut service, and then the predictable drop in ridership was proof that it didn't have the same demand it used to. So you cut service more, you drop ridership, and you then drop service more until there's so few riders, you say, "See, nobody likes it." We don't want to see rail service stagnate in this country. When you have more people exposed to it, enjoying it, communities getting to build an economy around it, seeing the great economic boost that comes from it, that shows people that this is something that's really exciting, that it has promise across the country. And that's what's going to do the most to keep existing service not just alive, but in really good condition, and the trains replaced and in top service condition as well. So I think this conversation you're having here today is not only really exciting and important for folks that don't currently have service, but we'll do only the best work to strengthen the service for those who do have a rail in their communities today. And at that point, I'll hand things back off because I believe we have opportunity for question and answer.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. And thanks to all the panelists. We've had some excellent questions coming in, and I'll sort of try to surface as many of those as possible. Keep them coming in from the audience. One question that has sort of come up a couple of times that I've seen is a question about how these sort of interstate coalitions or authorities come together and what their role is. I mean, it's one thing for Montana to be excited about restoring passenger rail, but if our neighbors to various sides of the state are not on board, that's a different proposition. How do these interstate coalitions come together and function and try to advance these projects?
Well, Justin, I'll take that one. The Southern Rail Commission was authorized by an act of Congress. It's unique in its ability, and that congressional authorization gives it the power to reach across state boundaries. So that's why you have Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama focused on that region, but we can also include Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, Arkansas, and Texas. We have that ability to reach out to those and are doing so now. And of course, your vision for connectivity in your region really can't be just within the borders of Montana. It needs to reach to your neighboring states because you are a part of a region that can have a very successful economic future. So having that congressional authority not only allows you to reach across those boundaries, it also gives you the authority to apply directly for federal funds through grants. In the good old days of earmarks, the SRC could get individual earmarks. While it is important to have the support of our DOT commissioners, and they are a part of the SRC commission, if you have a governor that rotates out and decides rail isn't their priority, it doesn't matter. The Southern Rail Commission keeps on moving and has done so in restoration of service now for 15 years, and they're actually beginning their first capital project by the January of this coming year.
Super. A couple questions coming in about trade-offs for communities. One of our attendees is interested in sort of how you would weigh trade-offs of investments in rail versus investments in intercity bus infrastructure, for example. How do you even approach questions like that?
So I'd like to take that, but I'd also like to maybe hand that off when I'm finished to Beth, because I know this is in her wheelhouse as well. There's a couple of things. Some are obvious, some are not so obvious. First of all, Rail Passengers Association, we do actually support the idea of buses as extenders to the national network. We're not just all rail all the time. But that said, one of the things that you have to look at with buses is capacity. It takes a lot more buses to carry the number of folks you're going to carry on a train. There's the whole sort of fuel efficiency per passenger issue as well. Trains can go in weather that buses can't. The roads are just statistically more dangerous than traveling by rail. So all of those things are I think, fairly obvious, and they factor into your thinking about the role of buses versus trains. But then there's also a larger sort of, it's almost a psychological component that we find that when you have something that is infrastructure heavy, like a train station, that capital ties the investment and keeps the community invested in it. I can stop bus service as simply as just saying, well, we're just not going to run the service anymore. And other than maybe a bus stop, there's nothing there to tie it to the community. It's a lot easier to start a bus service. It's also a lot easier to kill it. And when you put those in infrastructure investments in place in rail, that it's a signal. It's a signal to the business community. It's a signal to the community at large that we're here to stay. We're here for the long term, and we want to build and grow. And I think that's something that certainly you see that when you start looking at transit-oriented development. that psychology does play a role in the longevity of the service.
I don't actually have a lot to add to what Jim said. I think he laid things out very well. People find the bus very attractive because of its flexibility, but its flexibility comes with some downsides as well, particularly when it comes to intercity bus service. It's generally less under the control of public officials that are seeking to provide a public service to their community. But I think the goal is to have as many options as possible for your constituents. And I don't think we'd ever argue whether or not we should have rail or highways. It's really only in the non-highway modes we start to say, well, you only get one. And really, if there's four, you should get all four. And we should be seeking to give our communities as many options to get around as possible. In areas that have really good opportunities to move around, they have all. And so I think the best possible outcome is to have good intercity bus service and good intercity rail service. And often, I mean, you certainly find it on the local level, those areas that have great trains in terms of transit tend to have better bus ridership too. It tends to pull choice riders onto the bus in a way that bus only service doesn't. In places that have good rail service, intercity rail service, you tend to have really good intercity bus service too. So the two kind of play into each other. And I don't like the idea that you would pick one off of the other. I really think providing people with good options is the goal.
Sure.
And I'd just like to add that Amtrak has a bus that travels from Dallas-Fort Worth across northern Louisiana to Meridian, Mississippi, so that you can either join the city of New Orleans to go to Chicago at Jackson, or join the Crescent Meridian to go north to Washington, D.C. and New York. And Amtrak sees that as a benefit. And in the study along the Gulf service, their bus routes plan to Pensacola, Florida, out of Mobile, to Montgomery, and then on to Birmingham, focusing into Mobile, and also connections out of New Orleans to Baton Rouge and other cities to draw in the entire region to that route that right now will serve two principal cities along the Mississippi Gulf.
So we're getting so Jim, in your remarks, you painted sort of some of the higher level economic numbers and sort of made the case with data. I want to pivot to kind of stories of how establishing rail or reestablishing passenger rail has affected economic development in terms of business development or housing in particular. We got a lot of questions about housing, and particularly affordable housing. How has this positively changed communities where this service has been established or reestablished?
Well, again, I'm happy to take that, but I think both John Robert and Beth have at least as much expertise and maybe more, and certainly in Meridian, we've been able to see up close the direct effects and direct benefits to the community, and what that's done for improving people's quality of life. But certainly what we've seen when we look around the country is what access does, right? So it's a question of being able to move workers to and from opportunities, and making it possible for someone to work in one place, live in another. And I'm not just talking about sort of the Northeast commuter type model either. I'm talking about being able to get folks in rural communities access to economic opportunities. And we've seen that actually across the northern part of the country, with workers going back and forth using the Empire Builder almost as a kind of commuter service. So what you're doing is you're extending the economies geographically. You're making it possible for someone to earn money in one place and spend it in another. And that can improve access to housing, access to medical care, because you're kind of bringing in an economic opportunity that might not otherwise be there. And we see that, again, we see it in the large scale, but we also see it in little places all over the country. But John Robert, I mean,
Sure.
I'll add real quick that transportation is generally the second largest cost to the household after housing costs. And for very low income people, it often jumps above housing costs. So, finding ways for people to afford to get around without necessarily having to own and operate a car for every person over 16 years of age in their household is a very important tool to improve access. We do find that where rail service is available, the demand for that service is so high, we see property values increase. And frankly, if you're making an investment and it does nothing to improve the values around that investment, that was probably a pretty poor investment to begin with. We consistently see that where rail service is added or improved, we see increases in value. It's super important we make sure that those who are low income have access to that service. And it often takes real forethought before the investment, because once the momentum and the excitement around the area starts, it's hard to build it in. What I think is really important is to put that in front, not view that as an inevitable outcome.
So I'll just give you a few answers about Meridian. After we built our center in Meridian, which you've seen the quality of the place, property values quadrupled in the downtown. Sales tax revenue increased 60%. The return on investment to the city was $100 for every $1 we invested in that facility. You now have condominiums and apartments in the downtown. You have a vibrant after five life in the downtown, in which there was none beforehand. And you see a restored opera house with entertainment coming from the Kennedy Center down in Washington, D.C. to Meridian to perform. And you see the art and entertainment experience showcasing Mississippi artists. And a lot of people come by rail from New Orleans and Hattiesburg and up to Birmingham to enjoy these amenities within the downtown. But it's not just Meridian. Look what has happened in Denver, Colorado, with their downtown station, totally lifted what had been a dead part of Denver. And the Denver City Council was considering demolishing the historic structure. Also look at Normal, Illinois. It's a new building built that, and look what Normal has done to create a vibrant downtown center. We see it all over the country.
So what do we know about how COVID-19 has affected ridership? You see a lot in the media about how it's affected air travel. Any evidence on how it's affecting rail travel?
I'd like to start with that, if I can. So we've seen across the board transportation ridership decline, right? We see it in air, we see it in rail, we see it everywhere. But if you look at the long distance trains that Amtrak runs, the ridership there held up more than it did on the state supported routes and on the Northeast Corridor. And that's kind of, that makes sense when you look at it, right? That you didn't necessarily have folks jumping on the train to go from office to office, but for those in rural America or along the long distance routes, it really does mark itself out as essential transportation. We saw declines only around 60 some odd percent or thereabouts, depending on which route, on the long distance trains versus 90% on the Northeast Corridor, and those kinds of numbers. It's all starting to recover a little bit, but the long distance trains really did decline less because those trips were much more essential. And what we're seeing now is Amtrak has limited the capacity of the trains to keep them safe in the coronavirus era. They've limited bookings to 50% of the capacity of the train for social distancing and that sort of thing. So bearing that 50% in mind, we're seeing now on some long distance routes, they're coming close to selling out the train. In other words, selling out up to that 50% limit. So we're seeing that people do want to take the train when it's there because people do still need to travel and want to travel. And so the issue really just becomes making sure that it can be done safely. And then once you've taken those steps, we need to be able to prove that it's safe. We need to be able to demonstrate to people that yes, there are air filtration systems in place. Yes, the number of air changes per hour does exceed the standard. when you can do that, I think that we'll start to see the demand start to recover, because we're already starting to see it recover somewhat now. Is it where it needs to be? Of course not. It's still dramatically lower than it was in say, February. But it is gradually inching back.
And long distance trains are perceived as being a much safer way to travel, certainly than air today or bus today. And to put a fine point in what Jim said, keep in mind that the long distance trains today provide more revenue to Amtrak than the Northeast Corridor or the state supported trains combined. And last week, the long distance trains, Jim, were only down 48%. So
That's
in
right.
effect, they're running fully sold out and are providing between 55 and 60% of the revenue. So why would you take your biggest producer of revenue and slash it by 60% by going to 3 days a week? That doesn't seem to make business sense to me.
Justin, I'm going to answer the question from a much broader angle than the whole just rail. Travel is down. People have been told to stay home. They're not taking vacations the way they would have. They are not traveling across state lines as much as they used to. The commute trip has nearly evaporated. Even as we've seen driving increase, it's not been the commute trip, which was actually only 20% of trips, even though it's nearly 100% of our focus in transportation planning. It has definitely changed the way we move around. The real question is, will the way we move around be permanently changed? And I don't think in the long run, people are going to stop all long distance trips. They're never going to take vacations again because COVID existed at one time in our lives. So I think that interstate travel is going to restart at some point, and in some way, and rail service should be part of those options. I can do a whole seminar about what's going on locally, which is a much more interesting and difficult to predict sort of future. All I can tell you is anyone who tells you nothing will change, it should be dismissed, and anyone who tells you everything will change should be dismissed. In terms of local travel, what I will promise you is it will change. I don't know how, and it will be between nothing and everything changing.
And at the risk of prolonging this, can I just add on to something that Beth mentioned? Sure. I think it's really important. One of the things we've been looking at in the past couple of months to sort of study the issue is the travel behavior and the likelihood of return. And a lot of people have, to Beth's point, started declaring that, no one's going to travel anymore. We're all going to do just like we are right here today, all of us staring at a screen. And that is just an unrealistic assessment. As Beth says, people will travel, people will move, and they'll move for lots of reasons. One thing that people say is, oh, well, everyone will just start working online. Well, only 38% of America's workforce would be considered knowledge workers and able to work online. A lot of other people have to go somewhere to do their job. That's not going to just vanish. The idea that you could take call centers and remote work and put them out in America's heartland, and that way we'll just all work from home and everyone will just turn their living room into a call center. Well, when you look at the penetration of rural broadband, that turns out not to be a practical option. And then there's also the human connection, right? That people just want to travel. People want to interact with other people. And you see it really in I would call it a little bit of a negative. You see that when Memorial Day happened and people started running out to the bars and getting closer to people when they shouldn't. But that reckless behavior points to a psychological truth that whether it's for leisure or in the workforce, we're fundamentally a social species, and we want to interact with other humans. And the shape, the form that takes in the next year or two or three, I think, like Beth says, who knows? It's not going to be exactly the way it was. But the idea that we're all going to hide in our homes for the next 20 or 30 years it's just not going to happen.
Yeah, certainly look forward to a world that gets somewhat back to what it used to be like. Time to thank our panelists. That's all the time we have. A lot of questions coming in from the audience. Great questions about some of the specifics of what's being proposed for passenger rail in southern Montana. We'll get to those questions as we go. Keep the questions coming. And before we go to break, two things. We're going to throw up a poll question for you and have a look at that. And then as we go to break, some words from Dave Strohmeyer, Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer, thanking our sponsors. Commissioner Strohmeyer, are you ready to go?
We're ready to go. Okay,
right.
I was waiting for that poll question. That was so tempting, but I guess that's coming.
We can vote on it. I think passengers, so to speak, can see it.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, just another shout out to our highball sponsors of Jacobs and KLJ Engineering. Also, this event could not be possible and would not be happening now without a whole team of folks working behind the scenes. So a shout out to my friend and colleague, Jordan Hess, who is with us here today for all of his work, to our Missoula County communications team, Sarah Bell, Emmy Bristow, Allison Franz. How could I not thank our moderator today, Justin Engel? Thank you for your work. Our Missoula County GIS team and manager Mike Snook, Missoula Community Access Television, and Jordan, is there anyone else you want to thank from your neck of the woods?
You know, I really want to thank Alex Karklins from the University of Montana for providing tech support for this large event. It's a little nerve-wracking to have several hundred people relying on things to go smoothly, and Alex is carrying the day there. So thanks, Alex.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. Keep the questions coming. Short break, 5 minutes. We will reconvene at 11 o'clock. Okay, looks like poll results are up. Alex has made those available on the screen. Pretty even distribution of responses across the answer items. Have a look. Okay, well, welcome back, folks. Before we commence with our second session, we'd like to take a moment to recognize two of our highball sponsors, Jacobs and KLJ Engineering. Thanks for helping make this event possible. Okay, in this session, we'll turn our attention to building successful regional collaboration and connectivity. So, in the spirit of collaboration, let's begin with some brief remarks from our statewide elected officials, Senators John Tester and Steve Daines, Congressman Greg Gianforte, and Governor Steve Bullock.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to share a few words with you today. And a thank you to the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority and Dave Strohmeyer for the work that you're doing to expand passenger service in Montana. It is a pleasure to be addressing so many folks who know how critical passenger rail is to Montana's economy, connectivity, and infrastructure. That's why I support your mission to expand passenger rail throughout the southern part of our state, because the more Montanans who are able to utilize these critical services, the more benefit we'll see down the tracks. But we all know that over the past few years, our existing passenger rail service has been under near constant attack. The Empire Builder Line is a Montana-born success story. But still, this administration continues to chip away at the heart of the High Line, recently announcing that they will be slashing service down to just 3 days a week beginning in October. The Empire Builder is the gateway to the West for hundreds of thousands of Americans each year, and thousands of Montanans rely on it to travel, stimulate small-town economies, and bring tourism into our treasure state. So it's absolutely critical that we defend our existing passenger rail lines as we discuss expanding our surface infrastructure, because our whole state needs to be connected in order for us all to be able to succeed. I will be pushing to lay the groundwork for your priorities as the Senate discusses the future of the surface transportation in America, because it's folks on the ground like you whose hard work will keep us on track. So as we continue to work together to ensure that more folks are able to see that all Montana has to offer through services like Amtrak, please let me know how I can help, because I'm all aboard.
Well, welcome to this important summit to discuss efforts to implement a new rail link system across Montana. As our economy begins to reopen, it's important we have the critical transportation infrastructure in place to help better connect our rural communities and improve transportation across Montana. It's also important that we have alternative modes of transportation and services for Montana travelers, as well as travelers coming to explore what the great state of Montana has to offer. I'll continue working to ensure the transportation needs of Big Sky country are met, and that we work to achieve a solution to boost our infrastructure, our connectivity among our rural communities, and create jobs. Thanks for what you're doing, and enjoy your day today.
Hello, Greg Gianforte here. I appreciate the opportunity to check in with you. I'm honored to serve as your lone voice in the U.S. House of Representatives. It's a responsibility I take very seriously. We're living in very challenging, unprecedented times. The coronavirus has upended our lives in ways we couldn't have predicted 8 months ago. Even now, I'm working so that Montanans in every corner of our state have access to opportunities to thrive and realize the American dream. One way to achieve that is to ensure infrastructure is in place to support every community. It keeps us connected, from Missoula to Sydney and everywhere in between. In June, I urged the president and the CEO of Amtrak to reverse cuts in service that impact Montana. I'll keep you posted with any updates. Folks, there's much to do in Washington and in our communities. Let me know what I can do to help you. My door's always open. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me or my staff for anything. Thank you. Enjoy your summit, and please say a prayer for our country.
Hey, I'm Governor Steve Bullock. I'm honored to welcome you to the virtual 2020 Montana Passenger Rail Summit. Today, you'll hear from a range of folks: elected officials, students, business leaders, environmental activists, public health officials, and more, about a major project, the creation of a long-distance passenger rail service throughout the southern part of the Big Sky Country. This diverse group has a common interest at heart, and that interest is the well-being of Montana and Montanans. Safe, reliable intercity transport can help bolster small businesses, can help address climate change concerns, encourage community connections, and so much more. Thanks so much for joining the summit. I certainly hope you folks have a great conference, and I thank you for all you're doing to keep Montana the last best place.
Okay, so let's dig into collaboration and connectivity. How are we going to make this happen together? We've got 4 expert guests to help us figure it out. Roger Millar, who's Secretary of Transportation for Washington State. John Spain is Vice Chairman of the Southern Rail Commission. Elaine Clegg is Council President for the City of Boise. And Rob Eaton is Director of Affairs and State Supported Service at Amtrak. Roger, let's start with you.
Great, thank you. It's great to be virtually with you. And as someone who lived in Missoula and dated the woman who is now my wife, who lived in Billings, I would have loved to have seen some long distance rail on the Southern Corridor when I was living in Montana. Let me tell you a little bit about Washington's rail system and regional collaboration and our vision for the future. We're served in Washington State by 2 Amtrak long distance trains, the Coast Starlight coming up from California and the Empire Builder coming west from Montana and Idaho. We also, the Washington State Department of Transportation and the Oregon Department of Transportation cooperatively sponsor and fund the Amtrak Cascade service. And that service is contracted. We contract with Amtrak to operate the service, but the money comes from the 2 states. Actually, most of the operating money comes from the passengers. We have about a 60% fare box recovery on the service, and the capital dollars come from our respective state legislatures and governors. We're one of the few passenger rail systems today that serve both the US and Canada. Prior to COVID-19, we were serving 18 cities between Eugene, Oregon and Vancouver, BC, carrying about 800,000 passengers annually. We're serving rural communities, suburban towns, urban centers throughout the Pacific Northwest. And we understand regional collaboration because it really has been the heart of our success. We have community support for the service. We have state agencies cooperating, 2 states and a province. We have local government involvement, and we have elected officials that are behind it in terms of funding and policy decisions. So we have a vision in Cascadia of an ultra high speed transportation system between Vancouver, BC, Seattle, and Portland, which is really about a lot more than transportation. It's about opportunities and connections for the entire mega region, carrying us into the future, better access to jobs, to affordable housing, the ability to share our resources, increase our collaboration, address even more economic prosperity and a cleaner environment. So the system would create a new transportation spine linking the 3 largest cities in the region with connections to other transportation modes all up and down this north-south corridor. We need 2 states, a province, 2 countries, and numerous local governments and private entities all work together to make this happen. So what we're looking at right now, we've been at this for some time, but we're looking at a governance structure. What would an appropriate governance structure be that would entail 2 federal governments, 3 provincial governments, and cities, counties, metropolitan planning organizations, transit agencies, and the like? What are the funding and financing options that are available to us? This is easily a $50 billion project here in the Pacific Northwest. And there are a lot of people that are like, well, 50 billion, we just don't have it. Let's go on to the next thing. We will be spending that kind of money on transportation in the next couple of decades. The question is, where do you get the return on investment? The really interesting thing about the ultra high speed ground transportation corridor is it would be less than an hour from Seattle to Vancouver and about an hour from Seattle to Portland. So you could live in our region and call a buddy and say, hey, where do you want to have lunch? Oh, let's go up to Vancouver. What about dinner? Let's go down to Portland. That we don't have today. It takes you all day to drive from Portland to Vancouver. We could add lane capacity to the highway if we added a lane to I-5 in each direction from the Oregon border to the Canadian border. It would cost us $100 billion, roughly twice the high-speed rail project. It would probably take just as long to build. The lane would probably be full by the time we opened it. And after that expense, it would still take all day to drive from Portland to Vancouver. So we're looking at funding and financing. We're looking at ridership demand and revenue potential. It is a revenue maker for our economy. We're looking at the best locations for stations, how to engage communities. You know, one of the real keys to this, and I actually kind of learned this in Missoula, if you don't do stuff with people, they assume you're doing it to them, and you get what you deserve. So that engagement of the community and the private sector is huge, and social equity in all the aspects, the station sites, the routing, the contractors, ticket prices, and the like. So this is all part of the Cascadia Innovation Corridor, the mega region here in the Pacific Northwest. We're setting ourselves up with the vision of being a global mega region, a hub for innovation and commerce. And the ultra high-speed ground transportation system is one of several ideas we're pursuing, but it's the one that ties it all together. And our work is being supported by the state of Washington. Governor Inslee is a leader in this, by the province of British Columbia, by the state of Oregon, and by Microsoft. Microsoft has put as much money into this as each of the state and provincial partners, and we really appreciate that public-private partnership. So we've got business leaders, higher education, advocacy groups, not-for-profits, elected officials, housing and technology and agriculture and transportation and economic, all that stuff is coming together. This project is a means to an end of triple bottom line prosperity, economic prosperity, environmental enhancement, and access to opportunity and social equity. You really need to have broad-based support. You got to consider who might be your advocates, who might be your detractors, and you need to do it together with the communities involved. Don't do it to them. And with that, I'll hand it over to the next speaker.
John, why don't you jump in? And you're muted, John.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to participate in this panel on behalf of the Southern Rail Commission. The Executive Committee of the Southern Rail Commission had the great opportunity to ride the Empire Builder through Montana just a month or so ago. And it's a beautiful state. We really enjoyed the ride. And I want to tell you a little bit about what we think is a unique opportunity for the creation of other commissions similar to the Southern Rail Commission, which has the opportunity to bring together various states, various governments, both local and at the state level. And I want to go through just a couple of slides for you real quick and give you some background on the Southern Rail Commission. So go to the next slide, please. It was established in 1982 by a public law of Congress, and as far as we can determine, it is the only entity ever created exactly like us. As John Roberts said earlier, the creation by the United States Congress gives us a special standing that allows federal dollars to flow from a source on the federal government directly to the Southern Rail Commission. Each state, and we have 3 states, has 6 appointees by the governors of those states. So each of our commissioners serves at the pleasure of the governor. In each of those states, that also involves the Secretary of Transportation. So we have the ability to work closely with each of our DOT secretaries. They are a critical part of looking at rail as a part of our overall transportation plan for each of our states. As we said, it currently is Alabama, Louisiana, and Mississippi. But under the federal legislation, we can invite adjacent states to join us. So as John Robert again said, that gives us the addition of 5 or 6 states as we start looking at rail projects that may want to run through those states. And so as we look at the projects we're currently working on, it's the restoration of the Gulf Coast trains from New Orleans ultimately to Orlando, Florida. The first phase being Mobile, Alabama to New Orleans. So there's a real obvious opportunity for Florida to join us when it's appropriate. Let's go to the next slide, please. That shows you the route. It's a two daily round trips. And what you see there is the first phase with trains leaving each city that morning. So a train leaves Mobile, train would leave New Orleans, and it connects to the centers of tourism along all three states. And it's not possible without the SRC's unique structure. Can you just imagine that over the course of planning for this service, which takes multiple years, we've actually seen all three governors change from the time we started the project to our current project we're about to go to contract with. The SRC's ability to operate in partnership with the United States Congress and our three states gives us the ability to sustain these kind of projects over multiple years and over multiple political elections and jurisdictions. So it's a model that we believe will work in other parts of the country. We are encouraging you to look at that legislation. We actually have had conversation in many instances with your congressional delegations in Washington who have asked us to talk to you about this because we believe it is an ideal solution that can be done that you should consider. From a very selfish standpoint, we would love to see the creation of additional commissions across the United States with the idea that ultimately we might create a passenger caucus in the Congress representing multiple states, multiple commissions that would give us additional influence, additional funding opportunities, and additional voices from other parts of the country. One piece that I would add to this is that it may be unique to us, but I doubt it. Part of what we are interested in are evacuation trains. And when you look at Katrina in 2005, had we been able to move almost 1 million people on trains, it would have been much safer, much faster, and we chose not to do that. It's obviously important as we live here today. We just had a Category 4 hit Southwest Louisiana, and we're literally hours away from Hurricane Sally having hit the Mississippi-Alabama line. Think about people who don't have transportation, people who live in poverty, people who for some reason or another cannot get on an airplane or leave those areas where they are in danger. But being able to bring in special trains and moving large numbers of people out of harm's way into other northern and western states. And that's a critical part of our planning. In those instances, which we hope don't happen, but unfortunately are happening more often than we would like, we can use trains when these lines are built to get people out of harm's way. Next slide. Rail policy included, and this is much of what John Robert talked about earlier. Our partnership with Transportation for America means that they help us have a voice in Washington. And almost every significant piece of legislation that has addressed passenger rail comes out of the work of the Southern Rail Commission, with a great deal of support from our states and our congressional delegations from all three states. And frankly, and thank you for the support we've gotten from your congressional delegations to provide critical funding for what we're talking about. When we started this conversation years ago, the issue was always about how do you pay for it? Where's the money going to come from? The simple answer is now is that even in tough economic times, the Congress of the United States has provided 4 or 5 unique pots of money aimed at helping us create intercity train service. And so as John Robert and both Beth addressed, the Surface Transportation Reauthorization FAST Act includes money for these projects. CRISI is a unique program that will allow us to do the infrastructure improvements to restore service. And this Southern Rail Commission was awarded $33 million in federal CRISI dollars last year for this project. It was matched dollar for dollar by our states. So the 3 states put up $33 million to match 33 from the federal government. And that is an ongoing program that we think will actually be expanded in terms of the amount of money in 2021. The Restoration Enhancement Act addresses a real critical issue of how do you start paying for train service in terms of operating dollars. And this is a unique program that in the first 3 years allows the federal government to pick up 80% of the operating costs as you start a train, 50% the next year, 25% the third year. recognizing that it's going to take us a while to actually attract riders. And as Roger said, you have to get a fare box return from that. But the first 3 years, you don't have to build a ridership. And so these type of grants are a recognition by our friends in Congress that we're going to need some help to start the service. The Gulf Coast Working Group was established by Congress as a result of our calling to their attention that the Sunset Limited, which normally ran east of New Orleans all the way into Florida, stopped service after Hurricane Katrina way back in 2005 because the rails were destroyed. The rails were rebuilt, but the service was never started again. And we called on our friends in Congress who created a Gulf Coast Working Group of representatives from Florida to Louisiana. All states were represented, along with a number of local officials, and Congress actually provided funding for the Gulf Coast Working Group in cooperation with the Federal Railroad Administration to do a study that identified what needed to be done to restore that service. And that report is now complete, and we're now working to implement its findings. And finally, as we said on a couple of occasions, federal recognition allows us to ask for matching funds for additional projects, both for our operations and for projects that we are working on. Each of our states put into their Department of Transportation budgets the money for the Southern Rail Commission. It's not a lot of money, but each of the 3 states contribute annual dues, which allow us to underwrite the work that we're doing. Next slide. This is a video that I think you'll be interested in that shows you a 2017 inspection train that as we started trying to engage people along the route to tell them what Amtrak's passenger service might look like, we had the secretary, the FRA administrator, and a number of elected officials ride a train with us. And it's a wonderful opportunity for you to see the response we get from working people who really understand how important bringing passenger service back to their cities are. So we'll enjoy this, and maybe we can take some Q&A after that.
If Amtrak were an airline, it would be the 5th biggest airline in the country. So of course, the taxpayers have a role in this.
When they come here, they love you. Now we're going to get them here. We're going to get them on board. We're going to get them on this train, and they're going to be here, and they're going to stay, and they're going to love it. And this is going to be where they talk to all of their friends from all across the nation and say, if you want to see the beauty of God's great creation, go to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. Thank you.
We've got the top brass. We've got the local leaders. We're going to make this work for Mississippi and for the taxpayers. Thank you very much.
We just need more people. We just need more people to come and see this beautiful city, come see this beautiful Gulf Coast. Come and stay a week or a month or 2. Bring their money with them.
Gentlemen, Tallahassee, we gotta have it. So we're what? Fired up? Fired up?
So you can see from that a lot of outpouring of excitement for the restoration of passenger service along the Gulf Coast states. We think that will occur in your states as you start talking about people coming back to use train service. When we ride, and we ride on the trains a lot, and when we rode on the Empire Builder, the train was full. Working people going from city to city. This was their transportation choice. And when we ride trains, they're always full with people. And we urge our elected officials to get on the trains and have those conversations to really understand from those people that you saw standing next to those tracks in rural Mississippi, telling you how important it is, because it is in many cases the only way they have to get in and out and go to travel. One of the things that's critical to that is that we have international airports in New Orleans, international airports in Mobile. Mississippi Gulf Coast has a dozen or more cities that people go to travel for beautiful beaches, and as tourism is a major part of their economy. People fly into those international airports. Can you imagine taking a passenger train across America's Gulf Coast to those various cities, vacation, and connecting those international airports into those rural cities? It is an economic lifeline for those communities. And the mayors and the local people and the residents who live there came out just to say to Amtrak and those of us that were on the train, please bring it back. And that's really what it's all about. Southern Rail Commission bringing our 3 states together to look at critical infrastructure investments, restore service where we've lost it, and provide modern transportation to those rural communities that never really will have air service that they need, but this connects them to the air service and the other communities when we need to in emergencies and every day, just to move people in and out from around the world to America's Gulf Coast. So if we can be of help, please call on us. We'll be happy to tell you more about the Southern Rail Commission, how we were created. We'll do whatever we can to help you. If we need to visit with you, tell our story, please call on us. We're here to answer your questions and help you in any way we can.
Thanks, John. Let's turn it over to Elaine for the Boise perspective.
Well, thank you, Justin. Really appreciate being here and being able to talk about what's happening in Boise. Am I showing? Okay, I wasn't sure. You know, Boise lost service on Amtrak in 1997. It was one of the last times Amtrak did a contraction. And we've never been able to restore that service. And we've been interested ever since then in doing so. Boise happens to be the most remote big metro region in the United States. We're a city of 250,000 in a region of about 750,000. The closest big regions to us in all directions are Portland, Spokane, Salt Lake, and to the east, really not much until you get to Denver and Minneapolis. And so because of that remoteness, we serve an awful lot of people with various regional services. We have medical services, we have a big tourism industry. People fly into Boise and then go many, many places around the state of Idaho. Like Montana, Idaho has many great recreation sites. We also have a lot of economy that just travels east-west across the southern part of the state. And right now, the only choice, if you want to travel between the cities in the southern part of the state, is to get in a car and drive, or to use a Greyhound service that, frankly, at this point is quite slow and pretty underserviced. And we know from past work that if we were able to restore service, there truly is interest in riding. I'm going to show you just a few slides here. Sorry. Of what we used to have. So Boise, as I said, is a regional service center. And in 1925, we opened a new depot. These are pictures from that opening. We were a city of only 21,000 people at the time. You can see how many people were there. This is both the opening of the depot and the first passenger rail that came to Boise during that time. The rail became a very important link connecting us to the rest of this part of the country, the Northwest region, the Intermountain region. There was service north-south and east-west at that point. And the people in Boise really used that service always until Amtrak took it away in 1997. In addition to being the regional service center, we have been working on looking at how this rail could be used to connect within our region. We now, as I said, have about 750,000 people. This rail corridor runs right through the middle of that metro region. And we believe if we could restore it for passenger service, it would be also ripe to be used in addition to the intercity service as a commuter service between the cities within our metro region, and very, very interested in that. I was looking at what Amtrak had in mind before they took the service away, and I was able to find this map, and I thought everyone might find this interesting. This map shows in 1967 what Amtrak predicted they might want to do in terms of services across the country. You can see from Seattle through Boise to Salt Lake, there was 3 times a day service predicted. There was a route that went from Pocatello up through Butte and then over to Sandpoint and Spokane, and then across to Seattle. Of course, the Empire Builder that currently does exist is on that map. And then the Zephyr from San Francisco all the way to Denver and then further points east is also on that map. And finally, you have the Hiawatha line, which went from Billings to Fargo and further points east. If we were able to reestablish such a system, I think the Intermountain West wouldn't be nearly as isolated as it is today in the national and regional economy. We'd love to see an opportunity, as John talked about, to establish a regional rail commission, interstate regional rail commission in this region, to look at establishing some service, maybe like what you see there. We know that many of the states, like Montana, like Washington, have intrastate interests and are looking to establish passenger rail within their states. But we think if we can look at this as a region and really look at the connection between Seattle and Salt Lake, and then from Pocatello up through various parts of Montana to Sandpoint, that we really could establish a good system of connectivity within the Northwest region. So we are very supportive of reestablishing or establishing a regional interstate rail commission. To that end, we've talked to our congressional delegation, who also are very interested in it and would like to explore it and see if we could take it forward. Perhaps starting with a working group like they did in the Gulf Coast, where we would look at the economic benefit. We've had 2 studies since the rail went away about the cost of reestablishing service, and those cost numbers always, create a bunch of questions about, well, how could we afford that? I thought Roger did a great job talking about the cost of high-speed rail along the coast compared to the cost of adding a lane to the freeway. We always look at the cost, but we hardly ever look at the economic benefit. So I think maybe starting with the idea of looking at the economic benefit would be a great way to start that conversation. And if we could get these particular pieces of legislation through Congress in this next FAST Act that John Robert and Beth talked about, I think we'd have a shot at establishing an interstate commission in this region of the country. I was able to pull together 49 leaders from around this region earlier this year, including many who are on this summit, including many of the folks from Montana that organized this summit. And I think to a person on that call, we all agreed that this would be a great starting point. To be honest with you, I went into establishing or organizing that call thinking, well, it's another decade. Let's give it another shot. Let's see if there's anything out there. And there was a lot more out there than I expected to find, to be honest, and a lot more people who are beginning to move along. And in addition, then this idea of the Interstate Rail Commission, which I think would be a great benefit to this region, so that we could begin planning not one by one as states, but really look together what the connections could be. You'll probably notice the little spur there that goes over into Yellowstone Park and Teton Park. if we were able to reestablish this line, there really is some tremendous economic benefit, including tourism benefits in the region as we see it. So the Boise Depot is still here. The city of Boise bought it some years ago. We own it. We operate it as an event center today because we don't have rail to it, but we've always kept the rail open. We also own 18 miles of the rail line itself so that it would not get abandoned. And we stand ready to be part of a coalition that will, we hope, work to restore passenger service in the Northwest and restore the connections that I think will be so beneficial over time to all of us economically if we can get that done. And with that, I will turn it over to Bob.
Thank you, Elaine. Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to send a heartfelt hello to all the participants. My name is Rob Eaton. I work with Amtrak. I've been with Amtrak for 10 years in our government affairs department and state supported services. So my job actually here is to, well, besides here, is I work with local, state, and federal elected officials in the field for the 12 Western states, the United States, as well as the Department of Transportation, their rail divisions. So I have that distinct honor of working with the local communities, the states, on transportation. Before joining Amtrak, I served like John Smith. I was a city camp, was able to actually reestablish passenger rail service to Leavenworth with Amtrak after negotiating with BNSF and Amtrak. So I think my skill set here is unique to work with commissions. I'm going to be actually acting as a resource to the authority to provide direction on what opportunities are out there for the authority to reach out, talk to people, talk to elected officials, on how you move down this journey. We have some really great examples for the Big Sky Rail Authority to look at. We've, as John Spain has mentioned, the commissioner has mentioned, that we've got the SRC. It's a multi-state organization that has congressional authority. Secretary Millar has mentioned the two-state, province, two-country coalition we have here in the Cascades. And there's also another emerging rail corridor, the Front Range Rail Corridor, which has state authority, but it also has other Wyoming, representatives of Wyoming on their commission. And I serve on that commission as well as a resource. So I appreciate Justin saying that I was included in experts. Definitely not an expert. I can find the answer. I can look to my colleagues in Amtrak and various departments and bring in greater minds than mine, like our operations department, our engineering department, to help answer questions and help facilitate the discussion for the rail authority as the Big Sky Rail Authority goes down its journey to determine what type of service is right for Montana and the adjoining states, what it looks like. There's some really good questions that are coming through. I've noticed about type of equipment, where the alignment is, ADA accessibility. These are questions that will be, I believe, addressed from the rail authority as you go along that journey. So I'll pass it back over to Justin.
Super, great. Thanks to the panel and thanks to the audience. Some great questions coming in. One that's come in several times in several different iterations is a question about climate change. And what do we know about the benefits of rail or the sort of the environmental costs or benefits to rail versus other modes of transportation? How does this fit into a transportation mix that could address climate change in a positive way?
That's a great question. And we here in Washington State consider climate change in just about everything that we do. The ultra high-speed ground transportation system, when implemented, will take about 20% of the trips that would have gone by automobile otherwise off of the highway and have a positive impact. Most of our electricity in Washington State is renewable. And we have a commitment to go 100% renewable in the very near future. So projects like the rail corridor you're considering can be game changers in the climate change battle.
The city of Boise also has a renewable goal by 2035, and we're working hard toward that. We know that if this service were to be restored, a lot of people in Eastern Oregon who currently travel to Boise for services and across Southern Idaho who travel over to Boise for services could get there on the rail instead, and instead of using individual vehicles on the freeway. We know that that would benefit climate change. We also know that as rail goes forward, it's one of the technologies that can be easily retrofitted to electric service. And we're doing that now with our bus system, and would look forward to finding a way to ensure that as we restore this, we do it in a way that's as environmentally friendly as we could.
And I'm going to add from the Amtrak perspective, our locomotives are actually, our next generation of locomotives are very environmentally the top notch in terms of the standards for environmental. But what we also do, which most people don't know, is that in key locations, we try to install shore power, just like you plug in an electric vehicle, but so we reduce the idling. So where opportunities exist and we can put our shore power in, we actually plug in our locomotives at night. We do it here in Seattle to reduce idling of the engines, reducing the impact to the environment.
Super. So we got a couple questions about the role of private investments in these arrangements. I've seen we've talked a lot about public investment and these public commissions, et cetera. What's the role of private investment, if any, in some of these arrangements?
Well, I can speak to one that I'm working on in the state of Colorado. Actually, it's a unique opportunity. But first of all, there's always opportunity for private investment, you know, in terms of along the right of way. Previous panel talked about transit-oriented development and the stations. But one unique partnership that I'm working on, and Amtrak is actually with the Winter Park Resort. The Winter Park Resort is a private ski resort in Colorado, and we partnered with them to build a station at the resort itself. So they actually invested in the capital for the stations, that it was ADA compliant. They actually partnered with us for the operating costs of that train, and it's a really great public-private partnership to have a seasonal service 3 or 4 days a week during the winter months from Denver to Winter Park. So there are definitely opportunities, and Amtrak as an operator are looking for unique chances to partner.
Super.
Yeah, I think it's going to be incumbent on us in the Northwest as we look again at the Cascadia corridor to engage the private sector. It's the only way we're going to be able to afford it. We in the public transportation space often behave like a kid who mows your lawn and then knocks on the door and asks for money. You know, we have provided with our highway investment, with our public transportation investment, with our active transportation investment, with our investment in the Washington State ferry system, for example, incredible value adds to property that was worth X before the freeway interchange was built is now worth 100X or 1,000X. And it'll be the same thing with passenger rail in the Cascadia corridor, and really passenger rail anywhere. If you've got an activity center like that, and John Robert can talk about what happened. He did talk about what happened in Meridian. So how do you tap that value capture to pay for the infrastructure that you're looking to build? In a previous life, when I worked on the Portland streetcar project, we asked the development community in what's now the Pearl District to support the streetcar. They put capital into the project because they knew that they were going to make money off of the fact that the streetcar was there. We were just smart enough to ask the question, and they paid 20% of the cost of the capital, and they also supported us as we looked for changes in how parking was managed in Portland to pay for the operating. So we need to be more sophisticated when we talk about these public-private partnerships. Understand that this public investment is going to create value. And there's nothing wrong with people making a profit. I think that's wonderful. But while you're doing well, let's do a little good.
Sure. A couple questions coming in about kind of the mechanics of some of these rail authorities. Do these entities need congressional approval in order to apply for federal grants, things like that? And then other questions about the role of some of the economic stimulus that we're either, whether through the CARES Act or future pieces of legislation, or those mechanisms for funding for some of these infrastructure projects.
When we created, Congress created Christie and some of the other pots of money that we've talked about, those obviously benefited Southern Rail Commission because we could apply directly to take advantage of those funds. But all of those funds are available to all of these governmental entities, whether you're at a county level or a state level. The pots of money that Congress has created as a result of our work and our partnerships with other people are all available. And so when we talk about infrastructure costs, and to some extent even operating costs, there are dollars sitting there. It's an application process. It's a competitive process. It does require local match. In the case, it's an 80-20 match, but a large part of the infrastructure, rolling stock, is being paid for largely through federal funds in a competitive way. We were able to actually take some old earmarks. I know we're dating ourselves here, but we have a program in the Southern Rail Commission that pays 50% match for station improvements. So along our routes, we've had a dozen or more local communities match us dollar for dollar in using those federal dollars to improve, remodel, upgrade all of their train stations. And in many cases, without our matching dollars, those communities would not have been able to do it, and they didn't have an incentive to do it. But in anticipation of the train service coming back, all of those had to become ADA, and they have used the dollars that they put up, joined the dollars that we put up. And we have some really beautiful additions and modifications being made to stations across our 3 states.
John, I'd like to jump in on that too and add on to that, because you're exactly right. The federal funding is available for any agency. But one key thing that when I was out in Missoula with Dave is that it has to be adopted, or this project, if you will, has to be adopted by the plan, the state's rail plan, in order to make it eligible for federal funding. So it's going to behoove this authority to make sure that the cities, the MPOs, and then working with Montana Department of Transportation, the rail division, Lynn Santos division, of making sure that the rail plan is up to date and it meets the specifications of the Federal Railroad Administration for these programs. So that's the first check-in that we've got to do with the MDT, is make sure the rail plan is up to date, so we'll make it eligible.
I appreciate you saying that, Rob. I was going to jump in and say the state of Idaho has been talking about updating its rail plan for that very reason. There are federal funds available today to begin doing that. Ultimately, if we got an interstate rail commission, as John Spain talked about, we'd be able to apply jointly for some of the infrastructure and operating funds. In the meantime, you can apply individually for those or as a consortium of state DOTs, but of course it's a little bit harder, at least from what I've been able to determine, to make sure that you get everybody on board and get the appropriate MOUs in place so that as you do that, you have a good chance at the money. There was a quick question, Justin, about the 18 miles of track that I talked about in Boise. I'd just like to quickly say everything east of our depot was going to be abandoned, and rather than let that happen, the city of Boise purchased it from UP, and we use it now mostly for storage, but we keep the track up to date and in working condition, at least for freight. There are about 2 freight trains a day that use it, but ultimately, at least it's still there to be improved for passenger if we get that restored.
Super. Well, these panels just fly by. Questions are great. The panelists' comments are super informative. I wish I could get everybody's question in every panel. We're trying. We got some specific questions about the proposal, as I mentioned, that we're kind of going to save for some of the local players that we talk to next. But thanks to the panel and thanks for all of you for the questions. As we go to break, we have another video for you. This is part 2 of the Back on Track video produced by Tom Aldrich with help from Justin France, illustrating how passenger rail can be a force for connectivity, sustainability, and equity in our communities.
Montana is relatively unique around the U.S. in that we have this expansive geography with several different urban centers that are generally all roughly the same size. The interrelated commerce between those cities should only be getting stronger as the state grows in population, and this would be a tremendous way to tie those economies closer and let them leverage each other instead of operating in silos. The more points of connectivity we have between those centers of commerce, the stronger they're going to become together. I think in the next 20 years, as the Montana population grows and our economic outlook becomes more intertwined and more complex, less ag reliant, less tourism reliant, and we're going to have more tech, we're going to have local manufacturing, it's going to be all the more important to have more ways for our cities to interact with each other.
Have lost something that I believe is vital to our transportation portfolio in the state. I have rode upon the Empire Builder, and it's a great way to travel, but we have not been able to experience that and have that connectivity in the southern tier of Montana. So I see this as an opportunity to invest in our economy, to invest in the ability for our citizens to get around and be connected, and to invest in the environment of this state and this nation and this world. Passenger rail and rail in general is a much more environmentally sensitive way to move goods and people around. And that's at the heart of what I hope we can accomplish, is serving our citizens, addressing environmental sustainability, and enhancing our economy.
We heavily subsidize automobile travel and we heavily subsidize plane travel. And I think if we made similar wise investments in rail, we could get back to a really, really viable transportation method. So it's not only economical for passengers, but also the economic benefits for communities on the ways would be significant, as they have been in the past. There's a reason this iconic depot is here. It was an economic driver for Gardner, for the railroad companies, and for Livingston itself. Up on the High Line and other areas where there still is passenger rail service, they hang on to that service fiercely. And I think there's an amazing case to be made for bringing it back.
Transportation has been identified as the #1 barrier for a lot of our reservation residents. Anytime we can improve our infrastructure, we strengthen our local economy, and that is a really important priority for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. And as we consider COVID-19 economic recovery, any increased opportunity to provide enhanced transportation options are going to help with business expansion and development across the state.
The volume of people that have contacted me wanting to know if we can do this. And it's, you know, as much as people think I can do everything, I can't. This thing is, you know, it's left with the powers that be. They would need to get on board, and let's have the rail system here again, because I think it can only help our economy. It can only help the people of this state. I foresee people using the train to go back home when the legislature is in session, I foresee them using the train to go back home on the weekends, because traveling through the state is less hectic. And you know, when they're here, it's most during winter months and all of that. Nobody wants to travel during the winter months.
We really need to be poised in the state of Montana to receive federal investment when it happens. I truly believe it's not a matter of if, but when, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to be able to receive federal funds when they're allocated to passenger rail. We want to be in line enthusiastically with our hands up, saying that we're ready. The state of Montana finds value in passenger rail. So it's really important that supporters let their support be known. It's important that they contact their local elected officials, their state legislators, as well as their federal delegation. Make it known that they support the restoration of passenger rail, that they see value in it, that they're willing to make investments to pay for it, and that they think it would be a benefit to our community.
Okay, thanks for that video. We'll take a short break, reconvene in 4 minutes, and for our final panel starting at noon. Thanks, everybody. Okay, folks, welcome back. Kick it off again. See, Alex, thanks for putting the poll results about what sort of amenities you'd like when traveling by rail. Looks like Wi-Fi is a big one. Which long distance route would you prioritize? Chicago, Seattle, Portland. Yeah, interesting results there. Alex? Okay, so this is our final. And in this final session, we'll bring it home, bring the conversation home to Montana. There's been a lot of questions coming in about the specifics of what's being proposed here. So along those lines, the big question is, what's in it for Montana? To get us in the mood for this conversation, we have another video, this one titled Voices of Passenger Rail. And this was created by many of you. Great thanks to you for submitting your videos and stories for this video compilation. Alex, can you cue that up for us, please?
Choo-choo, the big train is coming down the track now. Choo-choo, the big train, the track.
Hi, this is Juanita Vero, County Commissioners. 40 years ago, we lost passenger rail service through southern Montana, but today we have the opportunity to bring it back and reconnect our most populated portions of our state via rail. Imagine being able to travel from Billings to Missoula in a February blizzard and actually able to accomplish work, or know that your aging parents can get to doctor's appointments or visit family and friends across the state. And for me personally, my husband lives in Miles City, and it would be great if I could get out of my car and see him. So together, we can do that.
We'll talk about how we want to change our world when we come back from this pandemic. And the way to change our world is that we don't have to use our cars as much as we did before. And the only way to do that is to bring back a fully integrated system of rail in this country. Otherwise, we're just going to go back to the way
needs without passenger rail being part of the solution.
I think it's important that passenger rail service is restored to South the Empire Builder to Scout Camp, all the way to Whitefish.
Environmental problems could be solved quickly, goes straight through town and runs both north and south all the way to the next urban areas. A self-propelled unit with jars could serve housing town and the high-rise unit, plus bring people to the mall, the hospital.
My mother-in-law can't visit us. All this could be taken care of.
Mobile and active. We see passenger rail as a
trains. A passenger rail line in southwest Montana and throughout Montana because I want a safe and reliable way to go and visit friends and family around the state, especially in the wintertime when roads are pretty slick, and I'd enjoy just to sit back, relax, and get there safe and sound. Thanks.
Choo-choo, the big train is coming down the track now. Choo-choo, the big train is coming down the track.
Hi everybody, David Simmons here, best known to Montana folks as Pat and Don Simmons' baby boy. And I have such lovely memories of riding the train, of my parents putting me on the train in suburban Detroit to ride the rails out to Western Illinois to visit my grandparents on their farm. I was 5 years old and Grandma and Grandpa were with me. I also remember riding the train around Europe like a lot of American college kids, and especially beautiful trips along the High Line in Montana. And I am excited and honored to add my voice in support of a passenger line across the southern part of the state, because there are things you can see from a train window that you cannot see from a car on a freeway, or especially from an airplane. There's something very special about riding the train. Something very American. And here's hoping that we can sing this lullaby to our kids on that train, the same lullaby that Pat and Don Simmons sang to me.
Choo-choo, the big train is coming down the track.
All right, well, that sets the stage nicely for our final panel. We will discuss making passenger rail under the big sky a reality. These folks have great collective wisdom on what the Empire Builder currently does for northern Montana and what restoring passenger rail in southern Montana could do for economic development down here. So we've got Paul Tuss. He's Executive Director of the Bear Paw Development Corporation. Jason Stewart, Executive Director of the Dawson County Economic Development Council. Jordan Hess, City Councilman here in Missoula, and Andrea Olson, Montana State House Representative. Paul, let's start with you.
Thank you, Justin. It's great to be on this panel, and it's great to have this conversation today. I am literally sitting here in Havre, a half a block away from the rail, where the Empire Builder goes twice a day, once east and once west. And I've spent my entire life in Montana, and half of it on the southern route, living in Anaconda, growing up in Anaconda, fondly remembering going over to the Butte Depot and picking up my grandmother on the Hiawatha route as she came to Montana from Spokane, and living in also Helena and Missoula. The last half of my life, I've spent right here on the Highline in Cutbank and now in Havre doing economic development for the past 25 years. And this is an important conversation to have as a statewide conversation. And there's wonderful excitement on this call, and I think throughout Montana, with regard to the economics of reestablishing the Hiawatha, a southern route in that part of Montana. As kind of the token Empire Builder guy here, I'm here to talk also about some of the concerns that we have here on the Highline, because we're all supportive of the southern route. What we can't do is sacrifice what we currently have with regard to our rail transportation system here in Montana on the Highline for that southern route. And unfortunately, the storm clouds are not only gathering, they're here. And along the Empire Builder here in northern Montana, we have already lost our baggage handlers and our station attendants in Shelby and in Havre. And on Monday, October 19th, we're going to be going from daily service to service that only services Montana 3 times a week. And so, as excited as I am for the initiative to bring back service along Montana's southern route, I would also encourage all currently 278 people on this particular conversation right now to reach out to our congressional delegation and encourage them strongly to invest in what we currently have in Amtrak and on the Highline, to stop the cuts that are going to be here in a month. And as an economic developer, I'm always about return on investment. And there was recently a study that came out that talked about the cost of having the Empire Builder as part of the overall Amtrak structure. And it cost annually our federal government $57 million. That's a lot of money. But the return on investment is the economic benefit is $327 million. So it's a no-brainer to support passenger rail service nationally, but certainly here in Montana. So my basic message today is let's do this, but let's do it properly and make sure that the rail authority that we're talking about includes people from northern Montana, and that we're all supportive of making sure that we support the Empire Builder as well as the Southern Line. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Jason? You're muted, Jason.
That better. Okay. Thank you guys for allowing me to participate in this. It's been a great summit so far. I've really enjoyed listening to everybody. I'm coming to you guys today here from beautiful Glendive, Montana, here in far eastern Montana. And for us here in Glendive, and even speaking for our wider region here in eastern Montana, having passenger rail service restored would just be a tremendous boon for us. Here in Glendive, we are a visitor destination, actually. Many people may not know that, but we are. We are home to Montana's largest state park, Makoshka State Park, as you see a shot of it right behind me here. And this season, even with the COVID-19 crisis, the one place people are still going are parks. And we had 92,000 visitors through the end of August to Makoshka. And so this year, we are on track and are definitely going to, for the first time in our history, break 100,000 visitors to Makoshka State Park this year. So that's just fantastic. But we know without question that if we had passenger rail service coming through Glendive, that visitation would be even higher. Because people are going to get off the train. Glendive would actually be the first stop in Montana for people coming from the east, from Chicago and that direction. So we know that having that service is going to, we're going to draw people off that train who want to come visit Makoshka, this beautiful 11,000 plus acres of magnificent badlands we have behind us here. That also, for anybody who's a dinosaur enthusiast, is just absolutely chock full of dinosaur fossils. We're actually the only community in the state with 2 stops on the Montana Dinosaur Trail. So that's a big attraction for us as well. So we see a lot of economic opportunity for drawing more visitors through Glendive and through the whole of Eastern Montana, whether they're into Badlands and dinosaurs or they're Lewis and Clark fans, they want to follow the Lewis and Clark Trail, but do it on a train. They can obviously do that on the High Line, but remember, Clark came back up the Yellowstone. And, bring them right to the gates of, Little Bighorn National Battlefield there and outside of Hardin. And especially, to me, I've always thought a little kind of nuts that we don't have passenger rail service to bring people right to the gates of Yellowstone National Park. And I got to imagine if that opportunity existed, that just the romance of being able to do that would be a big draw for people to want to take that train. Besides the opportunity to draw more visitors, for other economic opportunity for potential job creation. The 2009 study that Congress did about restoring this route suggested it could be up to 269 additional jobs created. Most of those jobs, because most of the route goes through Montana, would be in Montana. That would be big for us here too. I mean, a couple months ago, we lost, BNSF pulled out their diesel repair facility. We lost 85 jobs in one swoop. Glendive has been a railroad town ever since it was founded by the Northern Pacific Railroad back in 1883. So that's a huge loss, but that facility is still there. And so, if we had Amtrak coming through here, there's the possibility they may see that facility and be, you know what, we could use that. And we might put 1 or 2 jobs there. And that would be great for us. Besides the economic activity, from a social aspect, it would be just such an incredible benefit for us to have, both here in Glendive and throughout Eastern Montana, to have the opportunity for people to be able to get on the train to get places. We are about as far from Western Montana as you can possibly be. It is 450 miles from Glendive to Helena. And as you all know, our legislative sessions are during the winter, and it can be really dang hard to get from Glendive to Helena during the winter during a legislative session. I found that myself in the 2019 session. I had planned to go to Helena one day to go lobby we've been working to try to get a potable water line and a new campground built in Makoshka, because one thing it has lacked over the years is investment from the state to bolster its amenities and what we have to offer visitors. And the morning I left, a massive blizzard blew in, or morning I was planning to leave, a massive blizzard blew in and had the entire state sopped in from Helena all the way to Glendive with 4 to 6 inches of snow, blowing snow all over the roads. You looked at the MDT map and it was just ice and snow and black ice all the way from here to Helena. And so I didn't go. I canceled it because how could I have gotten there safely? And so it was sure really nice to have the ability to say, okay, I can't drive, but you know what I can do? I can jump on this train and be in Helena in a few hours and I can still do what I need to do. So for everybody here in Glendive and throughout Eastern Montana, to have that ability to be able to get to Helena for our legislative sessions or to do state business, or to put their kid on a train to get them to Bozeman to go to school, or just to, get to Missoula. We just don't have that ability right now. The only way to get there from Glendive is by car. And that's the same way throughout all of Eastern Montana. We can fly to Billings. We're lucky enough to have essential air service here in Glendive, but that's it. Any further west, it's car or nothing. So for economic purposes and social purposes, having this route restored would just be a fantastic benefit for Glendive and throughout Eastern Montana.
Super. City Councilman Jordan.
Great. Thanks a lot, Justin, and thanks everyone again for being here. My name is Jordan Hess, and I represent Ward 2 of Missoula on the Missoula City Council. That's my night job. I also, my day job, I am the Director of Transportation at the University of Montana. I come at this with just a deep interest in rail, and I think one of the things that interests me so much about rail is that passenger rail, just like public transportation, is truly one of the great equalizers in our society. On an Amtrak train, you can have students, college students going home for break, alongside business travelers, alongside people with disabilities who are unable to drive, aging populations who are unable to drive. And all of these people might be sharing a ride with tourists. It is truly an opportunity to get people from all walks of life together in a public service. And it's really a wonderful thing. And I think one of the things that is really interesting to me about this summit has been over the past weeks and months as we've planned this summit, where people are coming from. And you can see there's a huge diversity of geographies of where people are coming from. When you reported your zip code when you signed up, this is mapped here, and the size of the circle represents the number of people coming in from that area. So this is the country. You can see we've got pretty good representation along the rail route being proposed, as well as throughout the state of Montana. This is within the state of Montana. You know, a lot of interest here in Missoula, but also a lot of interest across the great state of Montana. So truly an exciting opportunity to bring together people from all walks of life. I wanted to spend a moment talking about my work at the University of Montana. As I mentioned, my day job is as Director of Transportation at the University of Montana. And this is an aerial of the university, beautiful campus, and it's got the classic problem of being landlocked though. We're surrounded by a mountain, by a river, by a residential neighborhood, and we really don't have any room for additional surface parking. If we want to build additional parking on campus, we have to build up. And so building up, suspending concrete on top of other concrete to build parking structures is incredibly expensive. And so one of the things that I like to think about in my role as transportation director is how can we get students to consider leaving the car at home? Because it's truly more affordable to get a student to leave the car at home than it is to build structured parking. From survey research, one of the things that we find is that our students, they don't necessarily bring a car to get around Missoula. It's really easy to bike and walk and take the bus in Missoula. What they bring it for is for the trip home and for access to recreation. We've got a great public transportation system at the university as well as within the community of Missoula, and that serves students' needs quite well. But really, it's that trip home that is the really difficult part. This is a map from our most recent transportation survey of university students. And the dot on the map represents their permanent zip code. I've removed all zip codes that start with 598. That is the Missoula prefix, and it includes down into the Bitterroot and up through about Thompson Falls. So as you can see, though, there's a lot of folks that live, a lot of students that live along that southern route. And the color of the dot represents the mode of transportation for how they get home. So a blue dot or a green dot represents driving alone or carpooling, and a more orangish reddish dot represents flying home. So there's a huge portion of our students who would be really well served by restoring passenger rail service. Jason brings up a really good point when he talks about the vastness of our state. And Jason is actually sitting farther away from me today in Glendive, Montana, than Roger Millar is on the west coast of Washington State. And I think it's just a really good illustration of how big our state is and how diverse our populations are. And Dave's going to get into it later as he talks about county level support. But there really is just a wide range of folks that this effort is knitting together. And that's one of the big reasons why I'm really proud to be a part of it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jordan. Representative Olson, your remarks.
Thank you very much, Justin. I'm representing House District 100 in Missoula, Montana. And as you can see from so much of what was discussed today, the United States and Montana grew up with a real strong basic infrastructure investment in passenger rail throughout the country. And this allowed for all of the kinds of things that we're now asking to have more access to. When people are stronger when they have more choices, as you've heard from even yourselves, and why you're participating in this, is that as people have more options, that is better for their personal safety and therefore their business work time, as well as and therefore that all translates into positive economic dollars. I think COVID has given us the time, and the time we're in is important to recognize all of these kinds of connections between all of the projects that we're working on. I participate at the legislature in business and labor, agriculture, the Federal Relations, Energy and Telecommunications Committee. And in all of these committees, we're talking about real problems that all come down to real basic economic development necessary to maintain what we consider to be the best of Montana. Our rural communities need economic development, as you've already heard, but we also need more economic efficiency between our communities. And this is for housing, as well to get affordable housing, as well as the kinds of lost time that we've heard talked about when we travel between communities. It's also a very important service because of not the family, just the family connections we've heard, but also the medical appointments that people cannot get to. So in this time of COVID, we do have a time to go into the big picture and recognize that the kinds of things that are happening at every level really show that this is the perfect time to move forward with enhancement of passenger rail, not only in the southern part of Montana, but throughout the country. The Federal Moving Forward Act does incorporate much more money for us as a legislator. I have heard from people throughout Montana, and everybody wants passenger rail. The people who are concerned about and have comments about it it's really about money. But as we've heard earlier, the money ends up being a drop in the bucket compared to the benefits that we receive. And if we really look at all of the benefits added together, you can see that we meet several state goals. And for example, the Montana Department of Transportation's main priority is what they call Vision Zero, which is railroads, which is highway safety. But what is the best way to accomplish highway safety is to get people off the road that don't want to be traveling, that shouldn't be driving, or that the weather conditions don't allow you to be driving, or that we're distracted because we're trying to get to work really quick. There's lots of reasons why having an option of passenger rail is a Vision Zero priority. In addition, the Montana Sustainability Council, looking at all of the consequences of climate change, as we all in Montana are experiencing the smoke coming from the West Coast, you know, we need to work for, and there is a country priority as well as a Montana priority of addressing these kinds of climate change issues, and restoring passenger rail is one of those options. The Montana legislature identified a need to really address the entire public infrastructure of public transportation. Now, I say that all these things are happening, and the reason I mention them is because there is all these silos of work being done, and this committee is finally bringing a lot of these people together to address how the benefits of passenger rail will help accomplish all of these goals. But what I want to leave you with, especially you participants out there, is that we can't do it without the people continuing to demand that all those interests that you have, the government fulfills its responsibility to you to make those things happen for you. So you need to continue, as I think someone's already mentioned, contact your congressional delegation, particularly right now about the Northern Line. But contact your legislators in Montana, encouraging them to get on board and to do the things that are necessary to be ready to receive federal funds, to make sure that we get to benefit from this infrastructure and the infusion of money into the infrastructure of this country. In addition, everyone can write their county commissioners asking them to participate in this. Dave will talk more about it, but in the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. All of these things are steps, but without the people continually participating and making sure that all of your elected officials know that these are important to you, that really helps things move forward. So I would like to leave that with you. All aboard Montana. Continue to participate in all of those ways. Thank you, Justin.
Awesome. Thank you, Representative Olson. Time for a few questions. A question that's come up a lot from attendees is the role that Montana Rail Link will play in this arrangement. Can any of you speak to that?
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
Unless somebody else wanted to.
Could we hear from, in addition to Representative Olson, I'm looking forward to hearing from you, as well as Jim Matthews from the Rail Passengers Association. I think has a great perspective on the common carrier obligations and how host railroads fit in to the picture.
Oh, I didn't. So that's what I was going to say. And Jim, you can add to this. I didn't know Jim was still on this panel, but I've met with Rail Link several times in regards to this process, and they, of course, and BNSF actually as well. Rail Link's position is really about the authorities that are established. The federal law, in order to address passenger rail, we work with Amtrak. Amtrak is the federal authority. Then you move forward, Rail Link will work with Amtrak when it comes to determining rail times with BNSF, but their job for the most part is they view their main function is doing freight service. And yes, because of the tracks and all that, one would have to work with Rail Link, but until the Passenger Rail Authority and until that gets into a position of fruition, they will work directly with Amtrak on these issues. Did I miss something there, Jim? Is Jim here still?
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry, Jim. I know you're on the panel. I just didn't know if the panel was connected still.
No, it's fine. So Representative Olson is exactly right. I would just add to that. One of the reasons why the host railroads like to deal with Amtrak is precisely because they have that experience, that knowledge base, decades of doing this, and a lot of Amtrak's history and culture comes from the host railroads themselves. The reason I say that is because the reason we have an Amtrak in the first place is the result of a kind of grand bargain that was created in 1971. And what was happening was that all of the what we now call the host railroads, or the freight railroads, they had passenger service, and they were not able to deliver that service profitably. And Amtrak was essentially a bailout, a government-funded bailout of the freight railroad industry. And the government took over the passenger service and assumed that common carrier responsibility in law, which says that if I give you my money, you got to take me where you go. The government assumed the liabilities, assumed the rolling stock, to the point where Amtrak was still cutting checks to people who never wore an Amtrak badge because they were retirees. So these are real things. And so the way this grand bargain worked was the government will take this responsibility off your hands, and in exchange for that, the Amtrak will have priority dispatch over your rail, and will pay the lowest possible price per mile for access. That's kind of the terms of the grand bargain. That has kind of been lost here in recent years, and we think that it's probably politically, it probably is time to revisit the terms of the grand bargain. But the fact is that it remains true in law that passenger rail is supposed to have a priority dispatch over freight lines, and that is in recognition of the significant financial benefit that the federal taxpayer gave to the host railroads in 1971, and continues to, by operating this service that would otherwise have to be operated by the freights. But again, that's a very antagonistic way to look at it, and we've reached a point now, I think, fingers crossed, where we are able to work with host railroads, particularly folks like BNSF, which are very, very good partners for passenger rail, to come to an arrangement that works for everyone, that it improves the access to the rail, makes it possible to get the slots that we need to run the trains, but also improves the overall economy and improves, by extension, the economic conditions, the preconditions that the freight railroad industry needs to continue to thrive and grow.
Super. Sounds like an important opportunity for collaboration. We got some comments coming to me from Amtrak's Rob Eaton about the importance of including Montana Rail Link in the authority and in the conversation. At this point, we got to move to our next stop on this proverbial train. So great thanks for the panel, but it's time for us to hear from Missoula County Commissioner Dave Strohmeyer. And Dave's going to tell us about the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. Welcome, Dave.
Yeah, good to be with you. And thank you again, all of the audience members who've carved out a few hours of your day to talk about what we think is truly a transformational project for the state of Montana. That is the reestablishment of service through the southern tier of the state, but also just putting an exclamation point on something that Paul Tuss mentioned earlier, and that is that this is not an either-or proposition. This is not about either the Empire Builder or displacing it with another route. It's about both and. And as we've heard some of the earlier speakers discuss, it's about creating a more resilient and a stronger system overall by expanding the system and not just contracting it or remaining in a defensive posture. So here we are in the year 2020. Since 1979, when we lost passenger rail service through the southern tier of the state, we have gone through cycles of enthusiasm marked by even longer cycles of despair in terms of how we are going to reestablish service through our region. And typically the effort has been led in terms of reestablishing service. This effort's been led by passionate individuals or advocacy groups, and we're going to hear here in just a little bit from a couple folks about the critical role that advocacy plays in all of this. But clearly that in and of itself, at least the mode of advocacy we've had in Montana has not gotten the job done. And what we've lacked has really been the institutional infrastructure, the governance structure to sustain and move an effort like this forward. We've heard from Secretary Millar in the state of Washington how they're working on that governance structure for a multi-state, multinational effort to create new passenger rail connectivity, high-speed connectivity. But similarly, here in the state of Montana, we've lacked that. In many states, there is something like a rail authority, but typically that is a creature of the state legislature in those states. Here in Montana, we have the unique opportunity of having a statute on the books that dates back to the 1990s that allows counties and counties alone to band together and create a regional rail authority. And that is exactly what we're endeavoring to do right now. And we'll pull up a map here showing the state of Montana and the status of our efforts. I had hoped to be able to announce today that the authority has been established already. It is so close that I can taste it. We are almost there. We have extended an offer to 24 counties across the state of Montana, stretching from Sanders County in the west to Webo County on the far east. And the invitation went out to those counties that once had passenger rail service in the southern part of Montana, or once again might realize that into the future. And that's not only the North Coast Hiawatha line that stretched east-west to Chicago on the east and to Portland and Seattle to the west, but also folks may not realize at one point in time, we had passenger rail service connecting Denver to Billings and Salt Lake City up to Butte. So we wanted to embrace those counties in this effort also. As of this morning, we've currently got 11 counties that have expressed an interest in establishing the authority. 9 counties have already adopted a joint resolution. The bar was set pretty low by our state legislature. You only need 2 counties to establish the passenger rail authority or a regional rail authority. We've met that bar. We've exceeded that bar significantly. And it's not a matter of if, but when, and the when is just a few weeks from now when the final county or 2 adopts a joint resolution to establish the authority. The only other remaining obligation by these counties that are participating is to appoint a member to the board of directors, the initial board of directors of the authority. I will be that representative for Missoula County. Jason Stewart, who we've heard from on this panel also, will be the representative for Dawson County. And we're still waiting to hear from a number of other counties on their appointees. What this authority is about is setting ourselves up for success. Councilman Hess mentioned this in one of the video segments we saw earlier in terms of being ready to raise our hand and say we are ready and prepared and in a position to both seek funding, to expend funding, and to make a project a reality. This is something we've not had to date, and this is something that I think will position ourselves to not simply look in the rearview mirror and try to recreate the transportation infrastructure that existed pre-pandemic, but to look forward and create the transportation future that I think all of us would so desperately like to achieve. This authority is a little different than some authorities maybe in other states in that we're not necessarily contemplating owning the rail infrastructure. We have 2 host railroads that we are talking about here, potentially 3 if we bring in the UP. We've got BNSF and Montana Rail Link and Union Pacific perhaps. And the function of this authority will be more so in terms of coordination, serving as that nexus between local government, state government, Amtrak, the host railroads, potential private partners, and it will fill a vacuum that we currently have. And it will also, I think, provide a real opportunity for synergy with something like what John Spain mentioned earlier by way of, might we be able to replicate the Southern Rail Commission model here for the Northern Rockies and Pacific Northwest and Intermountain region. And this rail authority within the state of Montana is going to be a strong partner in whatever multi-state, more regional entity might get established. So we're super excited to move forward with this rail authority. And with that, I will stop talking and look forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists or asking more or answering questions.
Super. Thanks, Commissioner. And folks, be on the lookout in the chat for a link to a survey helping us get some feedback on this event. So look for that and please complete if you can. Let's kick it over to some words on how to make this thing a reality. We can hear from Charlie Hamilton from All Aboard Washington, and we'll bring Jim Matthews from Rail Passengers Association back into the conversation. Charlie, let's start with you.
Thank you, Justin. This is a great honor to participate with you today. I'm representing All Aboard Washington, which has been around for 40 years. We've been about safe, reliable, frequent, competitive, and convenient passenger rail service. We feel that in order to make it successful, what we do needs to be part of a well-integrated transportation network, including local transit, conventional rail, and high-speed rail of the sort that Secretary Millar talked about earlier. We have worked consistently with Montana as we have participated in regional events on behalf of rail passengers in the Northwest, along with Oregon and Washington. And we look forward to continuing to do that. I would, Dave asked, what would be the advice for Montanans if you wanted to establish an All Aboard Montana type group? And so I put together a list, which I'm happy to share and happy to answer any questions. First of all, you need to be recruiting your friends. We have over 300 people who participated in this event today. And so if each one of you would bring in, say, 10 people that you know, that would be a fantastic group, which would be able then to talk on the county level, on the state level, and on the national level. As you heard earlier, it's really about getting support from legislators on all of those levels. So what kinds of people could you recruit? I would say people who could potentially use trains. You'd want to focus on younger and more diverse demographics, including university students. You would want to think about who would take the train for recreation, people who have disabilities, people who are environmentally conscious, potential business travelers, people who just need to carry stuff and don't feel like dealing with getting on a bus with a big bunch of packages. Those folks who are older, and people who don't want to drive during the winter. So those are all people that I'm sure if you think about 10 people that you know who fit in those categories, I'll bet you can get a lot of folks. Second thing would be to decide on what the priorities would be for such a group. You would want to say, okay, what is our first priority? What do we need to get more than anything else? As was discussed earlier, we have to deal with the fact that the Empire Builder is potentially getting cut. We need to save that. We also need to get the Big Sky Authority organized. So it seems to me those are the top two at this point. The other thing that you need to think about is, even though there are people who might not want to join a group, a lot of people would be willing to help if you ask them to do specific things, to undertake specific tasks. If you say, hey, we need to have you contact your congressman to ask them to support this particular bill. Those are the kinds of things that you can get anyone to do. Take advantage of the web, social media. Make sure that you're, particularly in these days when a lot of folks are not traveling as much as they would be, they're sitting at home, looking at Facebook and what have you. So take advantage of that. Finally, make sure that your board is folks who can do fundraising and have political clout. And keep in mind that regional coalitions are paramount. The folks in Oregon, Idaho, Washington, Colorado, all the states around you, we're here. We're more than happy to help. We look forward to working with you. We work, for example, with Barry Green, who's the Rail Passengers Association representative in Glendive. And I don't know if Barry's on the call this morning, but he's a great guy, and people like that are particularly important as we put together a coalition. And then I would say take advantage of the fact that all of these events that are happening, because of the fact that they're now being done remotely, it makes it a lot easier to participate in these now than they might have been if you had to do them in person. For example, this coming Saturday in Washington State, we're doing an event talking about the latest work that we're doing on an east-west additional route between Seattle and Spokane via Stampede Pass, Yakima, and the Tri-Cities. So if you're interested in participating, we'd love to have you. It's on our website at aawa.us/events. So please join us. We'd love to have you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. Let's have Jim offer some of his remarks about how to get this done as well.
So I guess one thing I would like to do, if I could, is if I could just foot stomp a couple of things that have been said this morning. It really does boil down to three things. You need a compelling case, you need strong coalitions and partners, and you need energy and passion. Those three things really are the keys to getting this done. In places where we have seen it work, like in the Gulf Coast, like the Downeaster in Maine, those were the ingredients that were there. And as I travel around the country, I see those ingredients in Montana. I also see them for Front Range Rail, and I see them on the Pacific Northwest. Those are areas where there is that sort of high energy and that group of folks coming together, coalescing. It's so important. I'd also like to foot stomp something that Beth said, Beth Osborne said earlier in the program, when she described when she worked for Senator Carper and a constituent would buttonhole Senator Carper with issues that were on that person's mind, and that those issues, because they came from a constituent, were elevated above those of larger groups. And there is an absolute truth to that. And so one of the things that we have an advantage of being as rail passengers, we are that person, we are that voter. And I always say that the strength of our organization has been that it's tens of thousands of individuals all across the country, and their message is simple. I live here, I vote here, and I care about this mode of transportation. And I want you to care about it, Senator. I want you to care about it, Congressman. Those elements are so crucial. And certainly we have had, as rail passengers, tremendous fortune to have strong partnerships with the organizations around the country, like All Aboard Washington. We have we don't really call them chapters because they're individual organizations, but certainly they're affiliates and with cross members. And you need to have that. That's incredibly important. And then I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the strong partnership that we've established with Transportation for America, with the Southern Rail Commission. And we have benefited tremendously from being able to be aligned with them, and we are able to reinforce their messages and develop some messages of our own. And so again, it's a team effort. You don't want to be splintered. You want to be in lockstep, united around this very simple idea that this is not spending, this is investment. And this is not about the profit to the train, it's about the return on taxpayers' equity. And when you start talking in terms like that, that is when you start to get folks' attention. The conversation in Washington has changed over the past few years, and that's one of the reasons why. And one of the reasons we were able to even have that conversation is, again, to get back to Beth's point, because we represent individuals, voters, people in those communities that care about this and want to see it happen. Just in the past legislative season, really beginning of this year, our association has been able to help draft 17 different bills, both in the House and the Senate. We've been able to persuade lawmakers to include language that's very pro-rail. we've been able to really affect change. And the reason we've been able to do that is because we're speaking for individuals in their communities and the grassroots that have spoken up and say, this is important to me. So if I could leave you with one message more than any other, it's that your voice counts, your relatives' voices count, your friends' voices count. And in a time when we've become so cynical about the role of the individual in politics, I implore you, please don't feel that way. Your voice counts. It counts when you call Congress. It counts when you send an email. It counts when you take part in some of our outreach and outreach by similar organizations. When you get those electronic messages, say, please fill this out, and it goes to your congressman or your senator. All of those things matter. And when you combine that with a group with energy and passion like you have here in Montana, and I've been to Montana enough times to see that this energy is just bubbling up from everywhere, I think you've got a winner. And that's really the most important thing I think I can leave you with is don't give up, stick with it, get involved, stay involved, be active, cheerful, and on it 24 hours a day. That's how you get it done. I've seen it work, and it's working here.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tim. So, like to final poll question just came up, so fill that out, and a reminder to fill out the survey that Jordan put in the chat months ago to get some feedback on this event. Okay, so I'd like to take this opportunity finally to thank all of our panelists and our guests, particularly those of you that submitted the great questions that you submitted. Also like to take a moment to thank our sponsors and the many folks who work behind the scenes to make this thing happen. Alex Kirklands, Allison France, Emmy Bristow, Sarah Bell, and many others. So Commissioner Strohmeyer, why don't you help us bring this thing into the proverbial station?
Absolutely. And thanks so much, Justin, for your willingness and very capable hand in shepherding us through this summit today. I would just second what Justin said in terms of the many folks who made this possible, the sponsors, our highball sponsors of both Jacobs and KLJ Engineering, Tom Aldrich, our congressional delegation who offered words, and the governor. And thank you, Jim Matthews, for what were very inspiring and compelling words that I will not try to replicate. This has been a difficult year, folks. This is no surprise. We are living through an unprecedented pandemic in this country. I know there are folks on this call today, on this video summit, who have either lost loved ones and friends or have been impacted in one way or another by the pandemic directly, or certainly indirectly by the economic challenges it has wrought on our communities here in the state of Montana, where I'm at, or in the states and communities where all of you are located and call home. I don't know about you, but I am frankly a little bit tired of snaking around with my tail between my legs in a defensive posture, trying to ward off retrenchment of passenger rail service. And I think it's time, and this was borne out by some of the comments of other speakers, to go on the offensive. Let's not just try to maintain what we have, as important as that is, but let's try to make a transportation future and system that is resilient, that's robust, that is truly forward-looking. And I think we can do that. If this pandemic has demonstrated anything to us, ladies and gentlemen, it is that we can still do big things in this country. We can accomplish big goals. We can be bold, and we can accomplish this together, outside of our jurisdictional boundaries, outside of our silos. So let's get with the program. And all aboard Montana. I want to close out here by sharing with us an original composition and performance by singer, songwriter, and musician David Simmons, who created this specifically for the summit. Stay in touch, everyone, and let's roll with his rendition of All Aboard Montana.
pistons brought us down that line. Don't you think right now it's about time? All aboard Montana, let's ride that line again. Watch our treasured beauty roll by like an old friend. All aboard Montana, like we all did way back when. All aboard Montana, time to ride that line again. Let's all work together, make our dream come true. One with another, just takes me and you. Them steel wheels and mighty pistons are waiting on that line. Don't you think right now it's about time? All aboard Montana, let's ride that line again. Watch our treasured beauty roll by like an old friend. All aboard Montana, like we all did way back when. All aboard Montana, time to ride that line again. All aboard Montana, let's ride that line again. And watch our treasured beauty roll by like an old friend. All aboard Montana, like we all did way back when. All aboard Montana, time to ride that line again. All aboard Montana, time to ride